everyone, it's Bethany from Madeline Jean Antiques and Restoration. I thought I would do a basic beginner's video talking about sanding, how to do it, what type of sander to buy, what type of sandpaper is most commonly used, what are kind of like the do's and don'ts with sanding for a beginner. Now, when I started out doing my furniture restoration business, I didn't sand. I didn't sand for a while, for like a year or so, mainly because I was intimidated by it. I'd never picked up a power tool in my life. So with a lot of trial and error and a lot of watching other YouTubers, I learned how to sand. So I thought, you know what, why not pass on some of the little knowledge that I have with sanding onto you guys. So let's talk about sanding furniture before you paint it. Now, a lot of people won't like what I'm about to say. A lot of the chalk paint companies out there are selling paint, and their biggest thing is no prep. You don't need to do anything. Just paint the piece of furniture and you're done. Voila! I wish it was that simple. And I would like to see these pieces hold up in time, adhesive-wise, how that piece is doing years from now. My opinion, you need to prep your piece of furniture in order for the paint to adhere to the surface. Because what you have with a lot of these antique and vintage pieces of furniture, you have years of grime and gunk and dirt stuck on them. You also have other finishes that may not work with the chalk paint over time, and you may have a failure with the paint actually adhering to the surface. So, how I like to do it, I'm going to preface this is just my opinion, how I like to do it when I restore furniture. I like to get that old finish off, and how I do that, I sand. So let's start by talking about what sanders are out there. Okay, you guys, let's talk about what type of sanders are out there. There's quite a few, there's different types, there's different brands. I'm going to show you my arsenal that I use. I don't have much. It kind of looks like I have a lot. I have 4, but I really only use 2 of them most of the time. So you have your basic mouse. It's called a mouse sander. It's in a triangular shape. When I first started, I used this a lot. I don't use this really at all anymore. So I don't use this mainly because the dust gets collected in this little thing here. And what I do now, I'm going to show you in a minute, I have hooked up my other sanders to my shop vac behind me, and that collects all my dust. So I would rather use a sander that hooks up to my shop vac where all the dust particles are getting sucked up by that. So I don't use the mouse sander, my preference, just for me. So there's no mice. Well, actually there's a lot of mice in my workshop. I just had a couple the other day. If you know my drama. I've had some mice issues. So no mouse sander here. So the next sander is called like a belt sander. This one, I use this a little bit. Sometimes when my Orbital sander, my round sander, can't get into the nooks and crannies. So this is where the sandpaper comes off. It's in sheets, and then you just hook it on. Again, the dust, most of it gets collected into this little bag here. Just because it's a messier sander, I don't really use this one much. So that brings me to my most commonly used sander that I work with is an Orbital sander. Orbital meaning round. Not too hard to figure that one out. So my Mac Daddy sander that I have in my workshop is my FESTOOL sander. This baby right here cost me $200. Yeah. Crazy, but well worth every single penny. I've had this one probably going on 3 to 4 years. Love it, love it, love it. And this is my most used, I'm gonna say, power tool in my workshop that I used. I love this thing. FESTOOLs, it's a company, I believe they originate out of Germany, and I bought this at the Woodcraft store. So if you have those stores where you live, you can find them there, and I think you can also find them on Amazon. So this is the ETS 125 EQ. Sounds pretty snazzy, huh? All those numbers and letters. Worth every penny. What I did, they also sell a dust extractor. That's where you can hook this up to suck all the dust. I can't afford one of those because they're like $500, $600. So I made another video of how I sand indoors. Go watch it. It shows you exactly how I hook this up to my shop vac behind me. I'll include the link below this video. So this is the one I most widely use. The sandpaper is by FESTOOL, specifically made for the sander, and it velcros on like that. And they have every grit available that you can think of. My other sander that I use a lot, I use my Ryobi Orbital sander as well. I like this one. And this one hooks up also to my shop vac. I've just made it work. So those are the sanders that I use the most when it comes to restoring furniture. I would say if you're just starting out, I would definitely invest in an Orbital sander. You can't go wrong. I think my Ryobi one right here, I got, I think for like $35, 40 bucks. And that was many, many years ago, and it's still working strong. So if you're just starting out, don't go buy a $100, $200 sander. Start with something basic and see if you like it. Just get a feel for it. So now we're going to talk about sandpaper grits next. And then I'm going to show you guys on two different pieces behind me how I start sanding a piece of furniture and kind of give you the do's and don'ts when it comes to sanding. Okay guys, let's talk about sandpaper grit, or if you are new to sanding, so I'm gonna speak like I'm speaking to a 5-year-old. Sandpaper grit starts out, the lower the grit is, so say like an 80 grit, the rougher it is. That means it's gonna really tear off the finish in a very aggressive manner, and it's actually really tough. This is my sandpaper drawer. I have a drawer just specifically dedicated to sandpaper because I use it quite a bit. So this right here is 80 grit. It's very raised. It's really rough. So the lower the grit, usually the thicker your finish is, the harder it is to get off. So you want more of an aggressive pad. And then as you go up the numbers, the finer it gets, the smoother your pad is going to be. So they can start, the most aggressive grit that I have is an 80 grit. I don't go any lower than that. All the way up to, I think I have 300. I think I have 300 grit for very fine sanding. And then with my just sandpaper for my hand sand, I have like 400 grit. That's what I usually use in between my poly finishes. I use 400 grit. It's super, super fine. So 80 grit is really, really rough. Here's like, here's a 180. This is like a mid-range. I usually start off with any piece that I'm about to start to sand. I usually start at 150. That's like my middle ground. And I see how well does that take the finish off. Is it taking it off relatively easily? Then I just stick with the 150 grit. Now say I'm using the 150 grit and it's not really removing the finish, I'll maybe try 120 grit, or I'll work down to an 80 grit, and we got to get that finish off. So right now, this coffee table here, it is made of nutmeg. It's also great to know your different woods, because that does affect the type of grit that you're going to select, and also the finish. It looks like there's really not much of a finish on this, so I'm thinking the 150 grit should be just fine. So let's hook up my shop vac here to my FESTOOL. I got 150 grit on here. And let's get started. When you first start to sand, you want to go with the grain of the wood, and you want to move slowly. You want to let the sander do the job. You don't need to be doing this motion. That's not how you sand. You want the sander to do most of the work. You want to keep flat level as much as you can, and even pressure. So let's get started so you guys can see me start on this piece. coffee table, and it looks as though I need to go down to a more aggressive grit, like 120 or 80. You can see here, some of the finish is coming off maybe. There you go. See that? So usually when you get it like this, you don't want to keep sanding because it's going to keep gunking up on your sandpaper pad, and what you can get are what's called swirl marks or pigtails. I did another video on that. Go check it out. I'm going to put it in the links of how to avoid that. So I'm going to get down to 120 or 80 grit and see if we can get this finish off a little easier. Unfortunately, I don't have any of that grit with my FESTOOL sander, so I have to switch over to my Ryobi, which has those grit pads. So let's go do that, and then I'll get it on a time-lapse video trying those different grits, and you guys can see how I sand this coffee table. Okay, I have my 120 grit right here. I'm gonna make sure this is also Velcro. You want to make sure the holes line up with the holes on your sander. And like I said, I got mine hooked up again to my shop vac so I can get all the dust. And let's try this again and see if we can get more of this finish removed with the 120 grit. This is happening. So you can see, look at that. It is just spitting the finish all around my coffee table. That lets me know I gotta knock this down even further to an 80 grit sandpaper to try to, this finish is a lot thicker than I guess I anticipated. See, this is how it works. So I'm gonna take that 120 off, and I know I got an 80 over here. But first what I'm going to do is I'm going to suck up that finished dust right here with my shop vac. Alright. I'm going to get my 80 grit here on my sander. And I'm going to clean it up. See, I have some residue left on here from another project, so I'm just going to suck it off. All right, you guys, let's hope this 80 grit tears this finish off. time-lapse video and you guys can see me sand this entire coffee table with the 80 grit, okay? With me sanding the top of this coffee table with 80 grit. Now what I can tell is I still did not get down to the bare wood. What I just did was kind of remove that top layer of the finish. How I can tell, it's not as blonde as I would like to be, and it's still kind of cloudy, which tells me there's still some finish left on there. So I need to hit it again with the 80 grit. But before I do that, and before you do that ever, if you're ever switching your sandpaper going from a higher grit to a lower grit or whatever, vice versa, you need to clean this from any of the dust residue that's left on there. Let me see if I can find my brush. I have a brush somewhere in my workshop. I do. Where is it? Hold on a second, people. Hold on. Where's my brush? There it is. Okay, here we go. So I use this. I love this little guy. So what I'll do is I'm gonna unplug my sander and you're gonna see just how much residue is left on here from sanding. Even if you notice during that time lapse, I don't have sand dust blowing at me or in my room because the majority of it is getting sucked into my shop vac. That doesn't mean that there's some not left here. So if I take a wipe, look at all that right there, okay? And you guys can watch me how I do this. Until I keep wiping with this brush until there's no residue left on this brush that I have to suck off. And then I'm going to do another sanding of this top with the 80 grit, and let's see if we can get down to that bare wood and really see it. It'll be just much more, it'll be blonder. So we'll see that in just a minute, okay? Okay guys, I just cleaned the top with my brush and my shop vac, so it's clean of any of that leftover dust. In between sanding, you also want to check your sandpaper to make sure it's not gunked up with the finish and that it's always like relatively clean. If you get built up gunk, you either need to change your sandpaper or you can also try to scrape it off with a brush. I've done that as well, just so I'm not going through a gazillion sandpapers. But this one, after that first go through, looks pretty good, so I'm going to stick with it and we're going to do a time-lapse video and we're going to see how clean we can get this top. Okay, I wanted to stop halfway through that last time-lapse video and show you guys the progress that I'm making on top of this coffee table. So you can see on the left side here, that's the part I just sanded. You can see it's much cleaner than this right side over here. You can see that that's still pretty dirty, has a finish left on it, and the left side right there is much cleaner. So I am making a difference. It's just slow and steady we go. I'll keep plugging away at this. Okay guys, I finally got done with the second sanding with the 80 grit on top of this coffee table. You can see it looks much blonder and brighter, and now you can totally tell that finish is completely removed from this coffee table, and I can go on to my next steps, which will be, now I used an 80 grit, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump up to 120 grit and then maybe bump up to another maybe like 180 just to make sure it gets really smooth. If there's any like swirly marks or any other like pigtails accidentally that happened while I was sanding, I can get those out with the 120 grit and the 180 grit. What happens next after that, I will put a wood conditioner on it and I'll most likely stain this piece. So if I stain it, I always use a wood conditioner. I almost fell on that. We'll just keep that in, right? It's what I do with my channel. I try not to edit too many of my bloopers out because I'm human. So anyways, what I was talking about, anytime I stain a top, I always use a wood conditioner. What else was I saying? With wood grains, you should know, if you sand too high up, fine, grit-wise. So I started with 80 here. Let's just say I go all the way up to like a 300 grit, which I wouldn't do. But if I did that, what happens is you close the wood grain. So when you are sanding at a very aggressive wood grain, you're opening up the pore of the wood grain, okay? You need the wood grain to stay somewhat open in order for it to receive stain. The higher up you sand, you start to close that wood grain, the finer you get. It gets so smooth that you can close off the wood grain. I've learned this because I did this. One time, I just did it, I went up to like 220 grit on a piece of furniture, and I tried to stain it, and I noticed the stain wasn't being absorbed in the wood, and upon researching, I learned that I sanded my piece too fine, and that way it wasn't able to receive the stain. So do a little research on your own about like wood grain and staining and how porous each type of different wood is. I mean, there's such a science to this. It's mind-blowing. To me it was, with sanding and staining. There's a lot to it. It all depends on your type of wood. It all depends the type of look you want. It all depends how deep do you want your stain to go in the wood. There's just so many factors when it comes to sanding and staining wood. What I was hoping with this video is just to start you with some basics. Just get your hands on an Orbital sander. I personally would get one that hooks up to a shop vac. That way you can sand indoors. If you can't sand indoors, you're going to have to do it outside or in a garage because the dust is going to go everywhere and on you. So I would just say go to the added expense, get yourself, I think my shop vac was $100. Go buy yourself a $30 Orbital sander and just get started and just start to learn what it feels like to hold the sander and learn what different woods, what kind of grit it takes to get the finish off. It all depends project to project. As you saw here, I thought for sure 150 grit was going to take the finish off here. Nope, I'd go all the way down to 80 grit. So it's very interesting with each project. You'll learn, you'll just have to adapt. But I'm hoping that, hi Biscuit, my dog's running around in here. I'm hoping you guys found this video informative and a little entertaining. It's a lot of information to get into one video, like a shorter video on how to sand. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. I do my best to answer those as quickly as I can. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. The button's in the lower right-hand corner. It's a red button. Just click on it, and that way you guys will get updated every time I upload a new video. I'm starting to do them more on a regular basis, like every Sunday night. I'm trying to upload a new video on things that I find interesting in my line of work with refinishing furniture. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks so much for joining.